Tip FM's Tip Today.
With Slattery's Garage, Hook On. Main Peugeot dealers in the Premier County. And now stocking the full range of the luxury French car brand DS Automobiles. Book your test drive today with Slattery's Garage, Hook On. See slatterysgarage.ie.
Tip-off charity check presentation is taking place in Roscrea this evening at 6 o'clock following the recent tip-off charity busking event. The presentation will take place at Ryan's Shop and Bar. That's the Auburn Lodge there, isn't it? With cheques being presented to the Aisling Murphy Memorial Fund, Dylan Quirk Foundation, Offaly Hospice Foundation and North Tipperary Hospice as well. Our own Eamon O'Dwyer from down your way will be in attendance and will record the event there, so it sounds like a great evening indeed. Now it's time to have a look at what's been happening globally. As always, I'm joined by Thomas Conway. Good morning to you, Thomas.
Good morning, Fran.
And we have to talk about Venezuela. I was saying to you off air, did you see this coming?
To be honest, I didn't. Now, Trump is so volatile and he's so unpredictable that he's notoriously difficult to anticipate. He did telegraph this to an extent. He kind of foreshadowed it in the national security strategy, which the White House published a couple of weeks ago. That called for US domination of the Western Hemisphere. And that is exactly what this is. This is an expression of that. It is the US and Donald Trump imposing its will on the Americas, essentially, and toppling or stealing, snatching a dictator whom they really despise in the United States, Nicolas Maduro, a left-wing dictator, the successor to Hugo Chavez, came to power in 2013 and essentially frittered away much of the country's oil wealth. Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves on the globe, and you can be sure that was another component of why Trump decided to intervene on Friday evening. It was the mass amounts of oil that Venezuela has, and the prospect of using that oil to, I suppose, as he said, enrich America and enrich Venezuela as well.
It's interesting, and you're putting it under a headline of the Monroe Doctrine, which is sort of a take on the Monroe Doctrine, the original one. Would you just explain that to us?
Indeed, yeah. The fifth president of the United States, James Monroe, set out a doctrine in which he called for what I said earlier, US domination of the Western Hemisphere, of the Americas, that the US would be this unrivaled power within its regional sphere of influence. Now, Trump has sought to revive that doctrine and he's dubbed it the Monroe Doctrine. And that is exactly really what this is.
It's to prevent meddling in places of interest to America.
Yeah, because you would have foreign powers who are entangled in the politics of Latin America, most notably China and Russia, which purchase oil from the likes of Venezuela and Cuba, and these left-wing regimes, the ones we see. Venezuela is a socialist country and has been since Chavez took power around 1998. Cuba is another one. People will be aware of that. And there are others across Latin America. And that obviously is at odds with the American model of capitalism that Mr. Trump so wants to promote.
And not to go off on a tangent, but can I pick you up on that for a moment? This idea of Maduro being left-wing. And still, some of his ideas are extremely conservative. I mean, where abortion is concerned, where gay rights are concerned.
Yeah, so he's economically left-wing. I mean, Maduro is a very wealthy man. It is worth saying. He has huge health himself, and his wife, Celia Flores, who was captured along with him. So socially, I wouldn't say they're liberal. I think it's a predominantly Catholic country, much like the rest of Latin and South America. But economically speaking, from that perspective, for instance, the state oil company would have been nationalised. He would have the Chavez regime. If you go back to the Chavez days, he would have nationalised a lot of the state infrastructure with good results initially. Lifted people out of poverty, but it eventually started to go wrong. It was an unsustainable model essentially, and that led to a mass exodus of people in recent years. Effectively, a humanitarian crisis in 2018, and there was a push to oust Maduro then. It didn't happen. There was another election last year in 2024. Maduro is said to have stolen that. It's said to have been a sham election. And so now, the big question is what happens now. And the American plan Mr. Trump said in his press conference, and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, backed him up on Sunday, is that America will essentially run Venezuela through the vice president who will become the president, Delcy Rodriguez. She was the second in the command to Nicolas Maduro. And she has no choice but to accept America's will now and to do what...
Yes, or else.
Or else, indeed. And Trump has threatened, huge consequences, more severe consequences, should she not comply.
Why does he not look to Machado?
Yeah, he says quite straight. Maria Corina Machado is the Nobel Peace Prize. Who officially won the 2024 election.
She gave him the prize, didn't she?
She effectively gave him the prize. She lavished praise on him, and she has done her best to ingratiate herself to him. But it's unclear. There was surprise in many kind of... amongst the Venezuelan diaspora on Saturday when Mr. Trump said that she wouldn't have enough sufficient support within the country. That was a very curious thing to say, because you would imagine she is the natural successor to Maduro here. She's right-wing, conservative-leaning, a capitalist, and she would walk into that role.
So why? Because he went so far as to say that she wouldn't have the respect of the people, which I found very strange.
Does she think? I mean, maybe it will take time. I'm in the woods here as well. I'm not exactly sure. It was very curious from Mr. Trump's perspective, because I thought, and I had said it previously on this programme, that they were lining up Miss Machado to take power. Now, if there is a democratic election and she stands, it will be very interesting to see what percentage of the vote she garners if she were to win that election.
Has he indicated when there might be an election, or will there be an election?
Well, he said the US will run the country until such a time as a fair and judicious transition of power can take place, or an election can take place. So however long that is, we don't know. But you would imagine it would happen. It would have to happen swiftly, because I mean, you would feel for the Venezuelan people here. A lot of them are rejoicing. It should be said. They're delighted. Most of them are rejoicing, but they deserve to elect their leader democratically. And at the end of the day, this woman, Delcy Rodriguez, although she is now under the command of the United States, she is a senior Chavista. She is she was an acolyte of Nicolas Maduro, and
so
therefore
her ideology is obviously
very much left wing. Okay. Yes, indeed.
It's going to be very interesting to see. Now, what about Colombia and? And I mean, Cuba?
That is an open question. And Mr. Trump has said, he has threatened, he hasn't ruled out doing something similar to countries such as that. Colombia's leader, Gustavo Petro, he does not like one bit. Now, Petro is a left-wing leader, but crucially, and I think the crucial difference is, he was democratically elected by the Colombian people, unlike Maduro, who was said to have stolen the election, who did steal the election and seize power autocratically. Cuba is another open question, and I suspect that will be particularly of significance to Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. He is of Cuban heritage.
Yes.
And this, what happened to Venezuela over the past few days, was of particular significance to him. This was part of his raison d'etre in kind of entering politics to free countries like his homeland, like Cuba, like Venezuela, from the dictatorships that they are under. So there is a huge question. I would note as well, Trump also said something about Greenland last night, and there was a response from the Greenland Prime Minister and the Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, who I suppose admonished Mr. Trump. So, there is no limit to what he could do here. He has defied all predictions, but he does set out, as I said at the outset, in that national security strategy, he wants to dominate the Western Hemisphere, and he will stop at nothing to do that.
What about Russia and China then? Because I presume they have interests in Venezuela. I mean, what are they saying?
It's like, I mean, Russia obviously is occupied with its war in Ukraine, but it will be sceptical of what the US has done here, but I suspect it won't go too hard on Mr. Trump, given that it needs to kind of keep the US on side, maintain relations with them in order to secure a favourable deal from them in relation to
And
Ukraine. China, a very interesting one. I note our man Mihal is out visiting China at the moment. I'm not sure. I doubt it came up in conversation between him and Xi Jinping. But Xi Jinping is meeting the South Korean leader today, Lee Jae-myung. So he has an agenda. But certainly this will be an uncomfortable one for him. What I think is happening here, Fran, is increasingly the world is splintering into these different spheres of influence, whereby the US is taking control, once again, I suppose, of the Americas, South America, Latin America. China has its patch extending from the Chinese mainland down to, I suppose, Taiwan and East Asia. And Russia is increasingly, it's obviously encroaching on Ukraine, and it has that pet patch of Central Asia. So there are three playing fields here across the world: America's, Russia's and China. And there's another question there for the European Union. Europe kind of issued this mealy-mouthed statement, not condemning what Trump had done, not issuing support for it. Some of the leaders, Giorgia Meloni, sort of welcomed it in a roundabout way. But Europe, yet again, has kind of been sidelined.
Did he break international law?
Of course he did, yeah. I think that is more or less certain. He probably... Democrats will argue that he broke American law. There's such a thing as the War Powers Act, which Democrats say he contravened in doing this operation.
But is that not about a president making a decision to go to war? And I suppose he wouldn't view this.
Yeah, he does not define this as war. The other thing to mention is the operation was actually, from a military perspective,
it was amazing.
It was a stunning success. It was amazing.
Do you want to tell us a bit about that? Because the amount of work that went into this, and it was so surgical, wasn't it?
Just staggering. I mean, spies, drones, blowtorches, you had a whole arsenal of weapons used. So at about 46 minutes past 10 on Friday night, Mr. Trump gave the order, and it was called Operation Absolute Resolve. Now, it had been rehearsed time upon time by the American forces and an elite unit, the most senior elite unit of the American military, called the Delta Force. They even constructed a model house replicating Nicolas Maduro's house in Caracas in order to perform kind of simulation exercises. So they really put everything into this. There were planes, over 150 aircraft, paraded the skies above Caracas. It's said that the Americans actually cut power in the Venezuelan capital, Caracas, on Friday night. Now, that's open to question, but that's what they said they did. And then they effectively exfiltrated or swiped Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores. They attempted to escape to a safe room. They didn't get there. They were taken by helicopter to a US aircraft carrier, the Iwo Jima, and from there they were transported to New York. Maduro will stand trial in New York later today on drug charges which carry a sentence.
And tell us about the charges, because it's specifically on drug charges, isn't it?
Now this I think that's a bit of a pretense, as we discussed. But the drug charges carry a minimum sentence of 20 years. It can extend to a lifetime in prison. So, I was talking kind of over the course of the weekend, some people speculating, well, did Maduro do some sort of a plea deal with Trump here to get himself out safely? I don't think he did, because he's facing incarceration here. I'm not sure what's going to happen to his wife, maybe something similar, but he will stand trial in New York at 5 p.m. today. So, I mean, we'll start to get reports. Reports will circulate throughout the day today.
His wife, that's a remarkable story as well, because she wasn't just the first lady, on his arm, so to speak, because she was instrumental in his career, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was behind him, the person behind him, really. He, despite being despised in many quarters in Venezuela, you could see he was a archetypal left-wing populist, kind of played to the crowd. We saw images of him dancing, kind of tried to come across as this happy-go-lucky kind of a guy, but it hasn't worked out for him. I mean, he was a ruthless autocrat at the end of the day, and a lot of countries across Latin America and across the world will quietly, in Europe even, will quietly be welcoming this, because Maduro, the way I see it, the only way he was going to go was if something like this happened. He had stolen an election. Still, at the same time, for America to go in and intervene in a foreign conflict or in a foreign country, it's at odds with President Trump's America First agenda. Really,
it is. But there's a lot of precedent for
there is. There is Manuel Noriega.
Either covert or very obvious.
Yeah, absolutely. And in Latin American terms, it happened 36 years to the day after the capture of the Panamanian leader, Manuel Noriega. So you're absolutely right in saying, and then there's obviously the Middle East and that. But your question regarding Colombia and Cuba and that's a really interesting one. I mean, Trump is emboldened now. This operation has been a complete success. Could he do the same to somewhere like Cuba, maybe? Perhaps. I mean, it's an open question.
All right, let us take a break. We'll be back with more from Thomas. Thomas is still with me. Conflicts to watch over the next 12 months. What should we be cautious about and what should we be looking at, do you think?
There are obvious ones and there are not so obvious ones. But start with the ones that really... really stick out, and obviously Russia, Ukraine. Yeah. I mean, in many ways, your guess is as good as mine here. It's a war of attrition at the moment. I suspect in 2026 we'll see some sort of deal. It will be a flag.
Zelensky says now it's 90% there.
And I would imagine that will come in the form of a kind of a frozen conflict, frozen along the current front lines, probably with Russia taking the Donbass region. I can't see another outcome other than that. I think there may be room for some creative ambiguity there.
It'll require that because Zelensky has been so adamant. About that,
indeed, he has, and I can see why. I mean, he says it would take a referendum. A constitutional referendum in order to facilitate that, and it is blatantly unfair. I mean, Russia invaded and plunged the country into war. But the way Trump is leaning at the moment, now he's been otherwise occupied over the past few days, but the way he's leaning at the moment, you would suspect that it looks like he's desperate for a deal. And I think there's war fatigue, huge war fatigue in Ukraine at the moment. The Russians are making progress, but it's glacial progress. They've made, I have the statistics here, they've seized just 1.3% of additional territory in the past 3 to 4 years. That's since the initial incursion.
Just really quickly before we move on, therefore, how can Russia be really perceived as being a threat to Europe if they are glacial in terms of what's happening in Ukraine?
Yeah, that's a legitimate question. I suppose the activity that is happening, like there was I think a Russian ship in Irish waters over the course of the past 24 hours. There have been drone incursions in countries like Estonia. Fighter jets have flown above Poland. All sorts of provocative actions, and I mean the fear is that Russia would, in a couple of years' time, continue its invasion if Ukraine is not awarded significant and credible and durable security guarantees. But I see your point. The thing is, Russia can keep throwing troops and keep throwing men at this.
And they have a nuclear option.
And they have the nuclear option, which Ukraine doesn't. And that goes back to the 1990s, the Minsk Accords. And that, in hindsight, was a huge mistake. Ukraine gave away their nuclear weapons, and that was their major point of defence.
All right. Israel, Hamas.
Yeah, I mean, the fragile truce, will that hold? I'm hopeful that it will. I'm hopeful that Donald Trump covets the Nobel Peace Prize so much that he manages to continue to exert influence over Benjamin Netanyahu. Netanyahu was in the White House last Monday and awarded Trump some special Israeli accolade, trying to ingratiate himself to Trump yet again. And the relationship between the two is very good. But still, Trump has leaned on Netanyahu, and he will have to continue to lean on him to make sure that this doesn't explode yet again. But people... I mean, there are Palestinians being killed. There's an upsurge in anti-Semitism worldwide. This conflict has had shocking implications across the world, both for the people of Gaza and it has really resonated with people in this country.
China and Taiwan, I suppose.
Yeah, and I mentioned Mio Martin is in China at the moment. Xi Jinping set to meet the South Korean leader today. That will be very interesting because they are likely to discuss Taiwan. And the big question is, will Xi Jinping make a bid for legacy, essentially, in 2026? Will they go and try to seize Taiwan? I don't think so. They have said the Chinese Armed Forces, the People's Liberation Army, will be ready to invade by 2027, but that doesn't mean they will invade. I think, in my view, Xi Jinping will hold out until the end of President Trump's term. I think he would be foolish to try anything during the next couple of years, but certainly there is a threat there, and Mr. Trump's backing for the island is questionable.
Two nuclear areas then, India and Pakistan. I mean, I'm particularly concerned about this.
Yeah,
one.
well, you should be, and people should be. I mean, 20% of the world's population between them, 350 nuclear warheads between them. Those statistics are hugely frightening. And of course, they were recently brought back from the brink. There was an armed skirmish in April 2025. India killed about 26 tourists, and that triggered probably the most serious crisis in years. But America has been mediating between the two, and America will have to, again, lean on both. As ever, I'm just thinking about it. We're dependent on Mr. Trump here to lean on both sides. And the way I see it, just give him the Nobel Peace Prize if he wants it, if it means containing these conflicts across the globe. Because there are furnaces of conflict out there, and that is a particularly hot one. The one he hasn't really touched at all is Sudan. And that's an internal war between the Sudanese armed forces, the army, and the Rapid Support Forces. A devastating civil war, and the world's most underreported and worst humanitarian crisis out there at the moment. That's likely to spiral on, I would think.
Congo and Rwanda?
Congo and Rwanda, yeah. The Congo's mineral wealth here is a key point in this one. Essentially, Rwanda is trying to eat into Congo's eastern flank and seize an area around the capital of Goma. It will probably continue to do so unless Mr. Trump intervenes. There are gold, there are minerals, there are oil at play here as well. So they are all the motivations.
Right, and just before we go, for fear we might think that North Korea are sort of chilling out in some sort of fashion, they want to be seen.
No, they've seized, I think, the opportunity here to fire another ballistic missile in its eastern waters. This is according to South Korea's army. Test launch comes just a day, but yeah, it became a few days before Lee Jae-myung meets Xi Jinping, and the pair will undoubtedly discuss that. I mean, North Korea is kind of an ally of China in some ways. But, this is, make no doubt about it, this is Kim Jong-un kind of seizing the opportunity. Other things are happening, so he said he'd fire a nuclear missile and see what happens.
To get himself back in the headlines again. Thomas, a pleasure as always. Thanks for being with you. Happy New Year to you, by the way, Thomas, as well. Thank you. Thomas Conway there of the Nina Guardian. News and information is coming up.
Tip FM's Tip Today.
With Slattery's Garage, puck on. It's time to change. Test drive the award-winning range of Peugeot hybrids and fully electric vehicles at Slattery's Garage today. See slatterysgarage.ie.